Welcome to Introspection, the podcast about moving from grief to growth. I'm Amy Lindner Lesser, your host. Introspection started out as a podcast about hospitality, innkeeping, and innkeepers. After about a year, I realized that my life and interests have morphed from hospitality to helping others navigate from grief and loss to growth and living. In this new version of Introspection, I will be talking about my personal experiences with loss, and there are quite a few, what I've learned along the way through my professional training, as well as from my coaching experiences. I'll also be bringing in guests to share interesting ideas. So grab a beverage, find a comfy place, take a deep breath, and listen in. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Introspection. Want to wish you all a happy July 4th. And it's a day where most of us celebrate freedom. What I believe, though, is that we can't really celebrate freedom unless everybody in the world is free, but also unless we ourselves are free. And what I mean by that is that we're free from emotions and grief, which are holding us from living a joy-filled life. There's a quotation that I love from the Buddha, and it says, "Every experience, no matter how bad it seems, holds within it a blessing of some kind. The goal is to find it." So when we're talking about grief and loss, and my new favorite terminology, life quakes, we need to figure out what is the lesson and the blessing inside of the sad, hard, difficult thing that happened to us. When we can do that, we can then move on with forgiveness, apologies maybe, and certainly a feeling of calmness, and we can accept that the change happened, the transition happened, and we can then move on with our lives. Summers, and we're right at the beginning of our summers, summers often bring with them family gatherings, weddings, and all kinds of celebrations. Even if they're not family, they may be friends gatherings for the July 4th holiday, or just because it's nice weather and let's go have a barbecue. Those can be really difficult for people who are going through a life transition, who are grieving the loss of somebody or something. I know for me, I was supposed to have spent this past weekend celebrating my cousin's son's wedding. And while I was looking forward to being part of that event and being with some family members, it was bringing up a lot of memories for me. I was the only person from my mother's side of the family to be invited. So I felt that there was sort of a heavy obligation, if you will, to represent the family well. While I loved my cousin very much and love his widow, I don't really know the young man getting married, which was part of my decision to not attend. It was, a trip that I would have had to make across the country. The cost was high. And I made the decision to evaluate the cost and the enjoyment and the amount of time. But I have to say that within that was also the weight of the responsibility of representing that whole side of the family. There also July 4th was a day that we used to always go to Tanglewood when I owned the inn in the Berkshires. We would celebrate with the James Taylor concert on the lawn, watch fireworks. It was an evening for family and friends. And I often would miss my husband even more after he died, just by being in wonderful surroundings, but where his presence was notably absent. Have you been in those situations? How do you handle them? One of the things that I did was I would try to bring, as part of my picnic to Tanglewood, to bring something that reminded me of Steve, whether it was one of his favorite food items, whether it was a blanket that we used to take when we brought our kids there, whether it was a wagon that we used to lug all of our stuff. And I would take those things and be able to think about him. And in this instance, I didn't allow myself to feel sorry for myself, but instead chose to celebrate the years we did have together, both at Tanglewood. And then when we lived in Pennsylvania, we used to go to the high school, which was around on the other side of our block. And there was a parade, there were games for the kids. And in the evening, there were wonderful fireworks. Again, always with Steve. I had never gone without him. So to combat some of the loneliness, I would ask my friends who came to Tanglewood to share a memory they had of Steve. It was really important to me on those days, or days where I would have been representing family, to have my loved ones who were no longer with me on this earth remembered in some way. Sometimes our friends and family feel that they're doing you a favor by not mentioning the person who has died by name. I never understood that, but I think in some ways it made it more comfortable for them. Death is a hard thing, and we really don't know how to deal with it. I know for my mother, on my wedding anniversary, or even on Steve's birthday, she didn't mention his name. And I finally asked her, why? Why don't you? And her response was she didn't want to make it harder for me. Well, my answer to that was, by you not mentioning his name, it did make it harder. I needed the support and the backup of somebody acknowledging that he did exist. It wasn't a figment of my imagination that I had however many years with him. And it made his life real when he was acknowledged. So that's something that I started to ask for from my friends. Tell me a memory. Tell me a memory of Steve here at Tanglewood, or on holidays. Tell me a memory of Steve at the holidays. We have wonderful stories from Steve at the inn with guests who would check in late. I remember the first few years of being at the inn, we used to call Steve the parking Nazi. He would be out in the parking lot late at night with a flashlight directing traffic, almost like one of those people at the airports who have the things and they're giving direction on where to go for the plane. Well, that's what he was doing in the parking lot for our guests. And they're funny memories. They're great. You know, often we think of just how sad we are to miss the person. And I'm suggesting that instead of thinking about everything we're missing, we think about all of the gifts that we had, the blessings of having them in our lives. I know I've mentioned this before in another podcast. It's a Jewish tradition to light what's called a yahrzeit candle on the anniversary of somebody's death. That just doesn't do it for me. I will do that, but I don't want to necessarily focus on the day they died. So what I do is I light a candle on the day they were born. And then I think about the blessing of their life and the blessings they brought to my life. Your loss doesn't have to be a person. It could be a pet. We all know that our animals are very special to us and leave their paw prints on our hearts. So think about the wonderful memories, the funny things. I think of my last dog, Migo, and laugh about the fact that he wouldn't walk on a linoleum floor. We used to have rugs. And for those of you who visited us at the inn, you know we had little throw rugs that we used to call lily pads. And that was so that he would walk to the kitchen and into the dining room. It could be, that you're facing the loss of a job that for many of us in this day and age defines our lives. Not just the money we earn, but that's important, but also what we do, the people we socialize with, the impact we have on the world because of our jobs. If the job ended for whatever reason, that's a huge loss. And we have to rethink what our lives are going to look like. And how we're going to redefine our lives moving forward. The other thing that happens, and this happens all the time, is something called an anniversary reaction. For years, I couldn't figure out what was going on. This 1 week in August, I got really depressed. Well, it was the week before my birthday, and I'm thinking, why? I should be excited. I should be thinking about my birthday. And then I realized that Steve died 2 days before my birthday. And what was happening was my mind was starting to go through the grieving process again. So what I've done, and what I would encourage you all to do, is mark those anniversary dates, those important dates in your calendar. And then find a way, whether it's a highlighter or something else, to just sort of highlight the days before. And notice if when you get to those days, if you're starting to feel an anniversary reaction. Are you starting to think more about the person or the job or the animal, or, if it was infertility and you have a date of when you stopped your treatments or even when you started your treatments, whatever it is, put that in there and see how you respond to it. During that time, give yourself some extra grace. Be kinder to yourself. Do more things to support your emotional self. Self-care is so important all the time, but especially during times of anniversary reactions, during times of grief and loss. It's not selfish. It's self-care. It's taking care of yourself, putting that oxygen mask on yourself before you put it on anyone else, so that you're there to be strong for everyone else. I've been researching life quakes. We all go through transitions in life, and some of them we go through with ease. It's, we go on our first date. That doesn't usually cause us to stop breathing. We graduate from school. Again, doesn't usually create major crisis, although a career change, and certainly when you leave a school, it's like leaving a job and you're leaving your friends. You're going to mourn for the life that you had when you were there. But some of our life transitions are easier for us than others. And, I may have had a very easy transition and you might have had a more difficult transition. Don't compare. Comparison steals joy, and it causes us to be hard on ourselves, to be punitive, to talk to ourselves the way we would never consider talking to somebody that we loved, or even to a stranger. Some of the life transitions are more difficult, and that's when I consider it a life quake. It's one of those things that happens and it becomes really large, and it leads eventually to a redefining of who you are, whether it's defining yourself anew as a single person, through a divorce, a separation, or widowhood, whether it's as a different career person, as a graduate, as somebody living alone for the first time in their first apartment, or moving out of their parents' house, or sharing space, like getting married. For some people, is a huge life quake. It's redefining how they live their lives. What I read recently, which was fascinating, is that we go through dozens and dozens of life transitions that are disruptive in our lives. And 1 in every 10 becomes so huge that it becomes a life quake. We go through one life transition every 12 to 18 months. That's pretty fast. And in something I read by Bruce Feiler, who's an author, it can take an average of 5 years to go through it. And as we age, they start to sort of grow and land on each other. So especially for those who are in midlife, and I'm going to say 50s to 80s, we start to have more and more transitions that we go through, whether they're more deaths, whether they're change in job like retirement, whether it's moving from a home that you raised a family in and downsize, whether it's losing some of your independence and moving into a communal living arrangement like a life care community or independent living or assisted living, deaths of friends and peers and families, the loss of your independence because of a health condition or a financial change. They tend to start happening more frequently. That's compounding your losses, your grief, and your ability to handle them. I want to suggest that you don't try to do it alone. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. And there's everything right about feeling the feels and learning how to emerge from that transition stronger and happier. I want to remind you that I have a free guide which is called The 7 Phases to Navigating Life's Transitions. And it has some journal prompts. And I hope that you will download it and use it and work on it. It's a great guide to helping move through that. One of the other resources that I have is that I offer a Facebook group, Navigating Transitions, and you can join us on that. I do my newsletter. It's going to start to come out, I'm hoping, by the end of the summer on a weekly basis, doing a little bit more of talking about life quakes and coping skills and sharing resources with you all. So, on that note, to all of our freedom, to moving through grief and life quakes, and just the idea of a quake, it shakes you up. So let's make it shake us up where we come out stronger and happier. So happy 4th, and remember that I love you and I support you. Looking forward to hearing from you soon. Bye-bye. If you liked what you heard on this podcast and want to hear more, please follow us and tell your friends. You can also find me on Facebook at Amy Lindner Lesser, Grief to Growth Life Coaching, and on LinkedIn at Amy Lindner Lesser.